I got a text from my sister the morning that I was flying home from a trip. Is there any way you can get here as soon as possible? Mom and I both need you. She doesn't have long. I was expecting this, but still, it was sad as much as it was a relief. For the last 2 months of Mama's 92-year life, she had had a really hard time, and us 5 kids had a really hard time living through that with her. We had been praying for God to come and get her, and now the time had finally come. I am childless by choice, and that's always because I thought that I'm just too selfish to sacrifice myself for somebody else. I never wanted to do that. I never wanted to give up a career or my life for another person. And I saw how my mama had done that for us kids and for Dad, and I just didn't want that for me. I wanted to live my life for me. Well, I got home from my trip, and I unpacked, and I did laundry, and I repacked, and I made the 6-hour drive from Virginia to Rochester, New York, where we had moved my mother about 2 years before that. She had started to get dementia, and we needed to put her in a assisted living facility, and we wanted her to be near our sister Hope. But the last 2 months of her life or so, we had to move her again to another facility. It was called St. Anne's, and it had the skilled nursing that Mama now needed. The toileting, the bathing, the dressing, and she couldn't walk anymore either, but she couldn't remember that she couldn't walk, so every time she got up from her chair or got out of bed, she'd fall down. And she kept wanting to get up and walk right on out of there. She did not understand why she was there, even where she was. And St. Anne's, we're waiting for a room for Mama on the dementia floor, but until that happened, she had to live on the rehab floor, and it was several weeks. And the rehab staff were used to working with people who were going to get better and go home. They weren't used to working with dementia patients. Now, you couldn't just sit Mama in front of the television all day at St. Anne's because this had been an active, intelligent woman. She loved music and the arts and history and science, and she loved traveling and exploring, and she still needed that intellectual stimulation, which she couldn't really get from the staff at St. Anne's. So we kids decided we were going to keep her occupied 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. It was emotionally and physically exhausting, but we did not want Mama to think that we had just dumped her there and left her. And she kept asking, when can I go home? I want to go home. And it broke my heart because she wasn't going anywhere. And I wanted to take her home to Virginia with me, to live with me and my husband. I could take care of her, but that wasn't practical for so many reasons. But then I wondered, were those just excuses because I'm a selfish person? The thought kept me up at night. Well, most of the mama care duty fell on our nearby sister Hope, so the rest of us would drive up to or fly to Rochester to help relieve her. And I would sit with Mama, and I would read to her sometimes, and we would look through old family photo albums, and she'd cry to relive those stories of the family and to see pictures of people who had passed on before her. And then one day she said, I don't want to look at those pictures anymore. I'm done. And it made me sad, but I guess she had made peace with that. So I would have to wait till she was taking a nap, and then I'd go outside and walk around St. Anne's campus, and I would just have to cry alone. Happier times were when she told me stories. She loved her grandpa's farm when she was a little girl, and she told me stories of going to visit him and all the things they used to do on the farm, and I had heard these stories 1,000 times and sometimes dozens of times during, one single day and visiting with her. But I kept her engaged, and I would ask her all these questions that I already knew the answers to, and I would laugh in all the right places because it brought her joy to tell me these stories. Thankfully, St. Anne's also had activities to help keep people busy. So one afternoon, I took Mama to a painting session. Now, a volunteer artist was outlining pictures of flowers, flower shapes on paper and tempera paints, and the residents would fill them in whatever colors they chose. Mama always thought that she was a horrible artist. She never even liked to try making art because she thought she was so bad at it. So I had to really persuade her to pick up a brush and participate. Now, when I was a little girl trying stuff, Mama was always there for me, giving me praise, encouraging me. Oh, honey, that's such good work. You just need to keep practicing. You'll get better. Oh, I'm just so proud of you. Well, now our roles were reversed. And I found myself giving her praise and encouragement. Mama, those flowers are so beautiful. That's a great job. Look at you. You're making art. She wasn't having any of that. She looked at me and she said, "Big deal." And she threw her paintbrush on the table. We were better off going outside. Now, in the years that my dad had died, he had died several years before this, and my mom at the time, they lived in Indiana, and I started, along with my siblings, we visited her much more frequently after Dad was gone because we didn't want her to be alone for too long. She was 82 when Dad died, and it was the first time in her entire life that she had lived alone. So we wanted to make sure that she had coverage, kid coverage. So I would make a few trips from Virginia to Indiana a year, and we had a lot of fun together. We'd plant her flower garden, we'd go out to plays and to movies and to dinner with her friends, and we would go for drives in the country, we'd explore museums, and one of the things we used to love to do was going for walks in nature. She and I both just loved going for walks in nature. But as the years rolled on, my visits became more caretaking than entertaining. She started to have medical issues, so us kids would all take turns going out there, and my trips got more and more frequent. I found myself having to take time off work to go and help care for her and just be there for her. I would take her to doctor's appointments. I would do errands and I would do chores. And before I would leave to go home, I would make huge batches of soups and casseroles, and then I'd freeze them in individual portions for her because I was afraid she wasn't getting the proper nutrition when we weren't there. So I wanted her to have meals, for a month or two until the next kid could come visit. And our walks became more me pushing her in a wheelchair, but it wasn't really a wheelchair, it was more like a rollator, and it did have a wheelchair-like seat, and it was really hard and squirrely to push her in that, but I wanted to get her outside so badly. And there's one park we loved to go to, it had this huge steep hill, and there was a loop that was about 1.5 miles around, and it was a big hill up and a big hill down on the other side, and my mom would say, "Honey, don't strain yourself, not for me, don't do that for me, don't strain yourself." And I'd say, "Mom, I'm your strong daughter, remember? And besides that, I need the exercise. I got this, don't worry about it." And I'd push her up this long hill and around this 1.5 mile path and this wheelchair squealy thing. And, trying to keep her on the path. And I would go to bed and my arms would just be aching. And after one visit, I developed tendinitis in my right forearm for several weeks after that. But it was worth it because Mama was worth it. At St. Anne's, I would wheel her around the campus, and in March, the signs of spring started to show. The trees were budding out, and the hyacinths and the daffodils were pushing through the ground. And with each successive trip I made there, spring was blossoming a little bit more. And at one point, the hyacinths and the daffodils were in peak bloom, and we would go and find a place just to sit. And we would just look at the flowers for a long, long time. She loved the daffodils. Sorry, I just need a moment. Now it was May, and the flowers were fading, just like Mama. But it was fitting for her to make her exit during the springtime, because that was her favorite season. So now during this last trip that I made to Rochester to see her, I arrived in Rochester in the evening, and my sister Hope and I drove over to St. Anne's, and we walked into her room, and there was that smell of institutional disinfectant. And Mama was in her room by herself. She was lying in her bed, and it was partially propped up, and her eyes were closed, and her mouth was open, and she was breathing really heavily through her mouth. And there was a damp washcloth folded neatly across her forehead. She had stopped eating and drinking the week before, and because of the dehydration, she had developed a bad fever. Well, I walked over to her bedside and I said, "Mama, it's me, I'm here to see you." And I bent down to kiss her and hug her, and she didn't respond. There was no acknowledgement at all. Well, Hope and I were spending the night there. There was no way we were gonna let Mama die alone. So I put on my pajamas and I curled up at the foot of her bed, in her bed with her, and I wrapped my arms around her legs. And Hope dozed off in the nearby lounge chair. And our brother, Marty, and his wife arrived at about 1 o'clock in the morning. They had come from Iowa to see her. And he knelt by her bedside and he started singing a song to her, a Van Morrison song. "Hark, now hear the sailors cry. Smell the sea and feel the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic." It's one of my favorite Van Morrison songs, and I really wanted to sing along, but I was afraid of crying. I did not want my mama to know that I was sad, because I was afraid she would hang on longer. If she knew that we were there and sad, she wouldn't let go, and we didn't want that. We wanted her to let go. So we dozed off and on throughout the night, listening to her harsh mouth breathing. And I had recalled a time when I was 13 years old where I had first seen my mother cry. And it was a really stressful time for our family, and I caught her sobbing into a towel in the bathroom. And I said, "Mom?" And she didn't respond. She didn't react to me. And I was stunned, and I was so scared because I had never seen her so vulnerable before. So I just walked away and I left her in her own grief. Now, she never said anything to me about that incident ever, and I realized many years later it was because she didn't want me to worry. Now I needed to be strong for her. Well, in the morning, a music therapist came and stopped by, and he was a young man who strummed slowly on his guitar to the rhythm of Mama's breathing and to the beat of her heart. And he sang old-time hymns that Mama would have grown up with, the old rugged cross, How Great Thou Art, In the Garden. And at one point while he was singing, her cloudy eyes opened for the first time since we had arrived, and I thought I saw a slight smile on her face. Later that afternoon, a hospice nurse came by to check on us, and she told us, sometimes people don't die until their loved ones leave the room. So reluctantly, we got up and we went next door to the lounge. My brother-in-law, Hope's husband, had brought us lunch, so we started eating lunch, and the St. Anne's staff had also wheeled in a cart of snacks and drinks and pastries, and their thoughtfulness made my sister Hope just burst into tears, which made me burst into tears, and we hugged and cried together. Well, we had only left Mama for about 20 minutes on her own before I couldn't stand it anymore. I ran back in the room to be by her side, and thank God she hadn't died without us. Well, I sat at the foot of her bed, and I massaged her feet. And a little bit later, Hope was thumbing through a hymnal, and she was stopping to sing the ones that she had known the tunes to. And my brother picked up a Bible and he was reading some verses to Mama. And later that afternoon, her breathing changed. It became slower with long pauses in between and really gasping, like she was really struggling for air. So we knew this was it. Well, I crawled into bed with her, and I put my hand on her chest, and I snuggled my head against her frail body. And just then my brother remembered what her favorite hymn was, or her favorite psalm. It was Psalm 100, and he picked up the Bible again and he began reading. Praise the Lord, all the earth. And it ends, God's love is enduring forever, and his faithfulness lasts through all generations. And just as he finished reading, Mama took her last breath. We were silent. There was no crying, just relief. Now, it was going to be a little while before the funeral director could come and take her body, and I didn't want to leave her alone, even in death. So while the others went into the lounge next door to take a break, I stayed with Mama. I was still lying by her side, my hand on her chest, feeling as the last warmth left her body. Now, I had seen some documentaries and read a few accounts of those people who have had near-death experiences, you know, the kind where people have died, but then their spirits are floating above their deathbeds, and they see themselves and their loved ones gathered around, and then their soul re-enters their body. Well, barring any evidence to the contrary, I looked up to the ceiling, and aloud I said, "Thank you, Mama. I love you so much, and I'm going to miss you, but I am so grateful that you aren't suffering anymore. Thanks for being the best mom ever." And I waved, and I smiled. A little bit later, everybody went back to the house except for me and Hope. We ate dinner by Mama's bedside, and we packed up what few possessions she had in that room in a couple of little boxes and a bag. And then we washed her body, and we dressed her in a fresh hospital gown. And then Mama had always wanted to donate her body to science, so her next stop was going to be the University of Rochester Medical School. And when the funeral director came, he thanked us profusely for going through with her wishes. Apparently, surviving family members often have second thoughts, and they don't go through with it in the end. And he told us that the medical students at the end of the school year, when they're done, they have a big memorial service for all of the people who donated their bodies, and they invite a Catholic priest and a Muslim imam and a Protestant pastor and a Buddhist monk, and they all participate in one ecumenical thank you ceremony. And I know Mom would just love that. So the funeral director very gently wrapped the bed sheets around her body. And he picked her up, and he moved her over to the stretcher, and he put her in a body bag, and he zipped it up just part way, leaving her face showing. And he wheeled the stretcher through the now darkened hallways. It was late at night, and everybody else was in bed, and Hope and I walked alongside, our beautiful Mamacita's face glowing in the lights of the exit signs. Out front, he collapsed the stretcher into the back of his Cadillac Escalade, and he rolled Mama inside, and Hope and I kissed her one last time before he shut the door and drove away while we watched. Finally, that stress from all that caretaking was gone. And so was the thought I had had about myself all of my adult life, was that I was selfish and that I would never, ever know what it felt like to sacrifice myself for another person until Mama gave me that opportunity. And it was such a privilege to be there to walk her home. Thank you.